Where's the workbook?
Alright, so take out your workbook, whoever is the recorder for this week. It's a short week. Put today's date, first thing in the workbook. Today is May 2nd. Then what I want you to do is I want you to make a chart in your workbook, and then you guys are going to fill in the chart. You're going to make a list. Okay, so I had a couple questions about your rough draft that's due this Thursday. Okay, your rough draft is due on Thursday, and I had a few questions. So I hope maybe this activity will help answer some of those questions. But it's a murder mystery detective story that you guys are writing. Okay, but I want you to be aware that it can be a crime and not necessarily a murder. Okay. So if maybe a murder is too morbid for you and you want to pull back from that a little bit, maybe your story can be about a jewel heist if you want. Okay? So what I want you to do in this column, so since I just said that out loud, I want you to make a list of crimes or murders that your story could be about. Okay, so as a group, come together and come up with examples. Okay, so maybe your story is going to be about a jewel heist. Okay, now somebody asked me about detective, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a professional detective, like a Sherlock Holmes or a Poirot, right, from Agatha Christie. Those are professional detective types. You can have your story be like that, but it doesn't have to be a professional detective. It can be really anything you want, okay? Any type of amateur detective. And we'll talk more about tropes today, but what I want you to do is come up with lists. Hey, what type of detectives could my story be about? Okay, so maybe an example, right? Maybe it's a student. And maybe the mystery is at the school, and the jewel heist probably wouldn't happen at school, but come up with different things to put in these categories, and then it's sort of like a mix and match for different types of stories. Okay? So our rough draft is due on Thursday. This activity is to get you guys thinking about your story, because if you don't have a crime or murder in your story, it doesn't really fit the genre. If there's no mystery, it doesn't fit the genre. And if there is no detective in your story, it doesn't fit the genre. Okay, so with your group, put this in your workbooks, fill up 3 different charts. Okay.
Is the MLA format the same?
MLA format is the same, so the formatting of the paper, the font size, but you shouldn't really be using like a works cited page because you're writing this story. So the color, everything like that should be MLA format. Your name, the heading, everything like that is MLA format, but there's no works cited page because this is just you guys writing. Okay. There's different, like, Mona said, can I do like a diary? Can it be like a diary? Yeah, you guys can write a story like that. And we'll talk about like narrators and things like that today. But it's pretty open as to what you want to do with your story. So you have a lot of freedom as far as the way you want to, how you want to choose to write your story. As long as there is a crime or murder, it's a mystery, like a whodunit is what we might call that, a whodunit type story. And as long as you have a character who is a detective who's trying to figure things out. Okay. Talk with your groups. If you have questions, let me know. I'm going to come around.
Can we use pronouns?
Yeah, if you have like a narrator, it depends on who your narrator is. So if the narrator is the detective, then yeah, you probably do this pronouns. It's not like an academic paper. Story. You guys don't have your phone. Everybody have one. So I went to Hong Kong Disneyland. And Disneyland usually have a place like that. So Disneyland has haunted mansion. It's like you go in there and you get into like car and ride around with like ghosts and stuff. Hong Kong Disney has something called supposedly it's because there's a sensitivity to ghosts in Chinese culture. Is that true?
Just say house. Tell me to school and visit houses. Alley. Lane. Do you
guys understand the two categories? Richard, you got 25. 25. Do you guys understand what you're writing?
Teacher. 为什么不可能？你真写啊？
Oh, in the record, yeah, so like girls,
废话。Stole cry， 我偷你很多钱。Steal。还有什么？Rob 是那种 Rob 不是 Steal 更难。他什么
I don't get the connection. The leaders I'm thinking of is
然后好多我只能想那个Suicide stuff。
the random
Guys, for crime or murder or crime, if you're having a hard time with stuff, think of a spectrum of seriousnesses of crime. So maybe it's something went missing from my locker, to maybe like a group of people were murdered, right? So there's lots of different crimes, and there's lots of different levels of seriousness. Go through that in your head, and maybe you can get some more answers.
need change of it.
我一直在学，最近的话，一两个月。其实我一直在学，一直在学，不代表。我之前有。
All right, 1 minute.
Poison is 手法。
中毒是的呀。中毒。
Poison is assault. Assault is like poison is part of the
Like a dirty cup.
Of course it is. Of course corruption is. I don't know how you got corrupt.
All right, time. Go ahead and close your workbooks.
Yes.
Make sure everybody in your group has this piece of paper. Put your name on the top. Says Tropes at the top. Student name. Write your name. I'm going to collect these after the presentation. So, this weekend I was in the airport and I stopped at the little kiosk that sells the books and I picked up a new book because I just finished my book on the flight. So I was looking at the back of this book and it says, a husband and wife go to a party but they couldn't find a babysitter. So they leave their baby at home unattended. And when they return from the party, the baby is gone. And that's the story, right? So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That kind of fits into the genre of what we're talking about. A missing baby, and the parents now have to figure out who took their baby, right? So that's the crime, kidnapping. And so then there's the mystery. Where'd the baby go? I didn't read the story. I just thought, hey, that's pretty relevant to what we're reading about. So we're going to talk about tropes. So Richard told us last week what a trope was, but it's like a common recurring theme. This is just a list, a short list of some tropes. We're going to talk about them. You write down in your own words what your interpretation of the trope is. Maybe this will give you some ideas for your story, and maybe this will help you recognize these themes in other stories. Okay, you'll start to see there's a formula for this, and maybe it's not so difficult to write our own story after all. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is absence of evidence. So this is the first one at the top of your paper. I think everything is in order, but if something's not in order, that's okay. We'll just skip around a little bit. But sometimes there's no evidence, and sometimes the fact that there is no evidence is evidence itself. That means, hey, maybe somebody cleaned up the crime scene. So the lack of evidence is actually evidence in itself. Now, kind of the reverse of this, and this is actually an Agatha Christie story, but the police show up to the scene of a crime, and they find this evidence, and they find this evidence, and they find this evidence. They're like, wow, we have so much evidence. But then Poirot's like, oh no, that's too much evidence. That means we can't trust it. That means it's planted. If there maybe the fact that there's too much evidence is evidence that maybe somebody is trying to set someone up. Okay, so the absence of evidence or too much evidence is a trope. So maybe the example here, the absence of fingerprints, right? Oh, we've checked the whole crime scene and there's no fingerprints. What is that evidence of? Either the person cleaned the crime scene, or the person was wearing gloves, Right? So the absence of evidence could be evidence itself. Or we went into the tool shed and there's this outline on the wall of a saw, but there's no saw there. So where's the saw? So maybe the absence of an item is evidence. So maybe there's something missing from the crime scene, and then that's evidence. So another example here. The police see a man ditch a glove that a witness saw the man shoot somebody with, but when they check the glove, there is no gun residue from when he fired the gun, so maybe that shows that it was staged. So again, lack of evidence. The next one, this is probably the most common, but this is the twist ending. If you're, you guys heard of M. Night Shyamalan? He made the movie The Sixth Sense and that new movie called Split. But all of his movies have a twist at the end. So when you're watching his movie, you're almost like, okay, what's the twist? You know the twist is coming, which makes it less effective. Because, oh, you know the twist is coming, then you're not really surprised by it. But it says this is the oldest trick in the book. The plot leads towards an inevitable conclusion, and then at the last possible minute, we throw something in that changes everything. Sure, we're all familiar with this trope, the twist ending. Maybe you enjoy a story with a good twist ending. So it looks like the cops have an open and shut case against the scary minority suspect, but then bam, a crucial piece of evidence turns up to set them straight. It looks like our heroes are totally boned, then bam, the forgotten super weapon or the cavalry turns up. Twist ending, pretty easy. Should be familiar with this one. The problem with the twist ending is like what I said, it can become a subverted trope. You set the viewer up for one thing and then pull the rug out from under them. But the problem is, after a certain point, the opposite of the trope becomes a dead horse trope itself. In a normal series, you know that they can't go around undermining the entire premise, so when it looks like it's going that way, you already know that it's going to be a twist ending. So if it's too obvious, right, if all fingers are pointed at this person and it's like it's obvious that the butler did it the whole time, then you sort of know as the viewer that the butler could not have done it. Because if it's super obvious who the killer is, then that can't be the killer, which then ruins it. Does that make sense? Things start to get confusing when we start talking about subverted tropes. All right, that would be a subverted trope. When your twist ending is too obvious. So what is a subverted trope? Is this on the worksheet? Yes, subverted trope. Now, if you can get good at this, so it's like playing bait and switch with a trope. It makes you think that a trope is going to happen, but it doesn't. This kind of requires an educated audience. So somebody who is familiar with the genre. So how do we know that a trope is going to happen? Well, it's sort of subconscious. So we might, if we become really familiar with what tropes are and we know all the tropes, then we'll start to recognize them in TV shows. And then this might start making you become really disappointed in movies and TV shows because you go, oh, I've seen this before. But a subverted trope might make you go, oh, I've seen this before. And then it isn't what you thought, and you're like, wow, that was really great. So it's the writer building on your expectation only to reveal that the expected trope was actually a red herring. So we all know what a red herring is now. It's something that misleads us, either intentionally or unintentionally. The next one I talked about this last week, the anonymous killer narrator. So in your story, perhaps there's a section of the story, maybe your detective is normally the narrator. But then for a portion of your story, the killer is the narrator. Or maybe the killer is the narrator the whole time. So it could be interchapters, where the beginning of your story is by the detective, and then the killer, and then the detective, and then the killer. This could be difficult to do. But if you're going to do this, then you have to leave it gender neutral. Otherwise, oh, we know it's a boy. We know the killer's a boy, or we know the killer's a girl. So it's to remain anonymous. This is one we see a lot in movies, and if you guys recognize this movie, does anyone know what movie this is? Close.
Hannibal.
Yeah, this is Hannibal Lecter. That's correct. What's the movie?
Silence Lab.
Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, okay.
Very good. So, it's an old movie. So this is Clarice. So in this movie, they're trying to find a serial killer. I think his name's Buffalo Bill. And he like takes the skin off people and wears it. And so to find Buffalo Bill, they go and talk to Hannibal Lecter, a really crazy psycho killer, so that they can try to get inside the head of another killer. So consulting a convicted killer. How do we find the killer that's on the loose? We talk to the killer that we've already caught, and he teaches us his ways. So consulting a convicted killer. A serial killer is on the loose, and the great detectives and profiles running the investigation can't get a break in the case before the perpetrator strikes again. But luckily, the police have another serial killer already behind bars, and he's going to help with the investigation. I think maybe they promised him a jail cell with a view, right? Or they hold something against him. And then maybe at the end of the story, the guy that helped the whole time escapes prison, but you catch the serial killer that was on the loose, but you've set yourself up for another book, right? Or a sequel to a movie. So then your second book can be about catching the killer that you already have the relationship with. We see this a lot. It's like the good guys have to team up with the bad guys to beat the really bad guy. You might see that in like a superhero movie. Alright, there's a lot here on this slide, but this is the stakeout, which you kind of recognize just from the title of it. But a stakeout is one character or a group of characters, sometimes like in a van parked outside of a place, and they're trying to solve a mystery, and so they go on a stakeout, like an overnight spy mission. It's like they're camping. It's usually in like a weird undercover van. So here's some conditions. The characters are watching one or more locations. The characters are hiding the fact that they're in a stakeout from someone, and they're trying to gather intelligence. Now this is not to be confused with other tropes. So if the purpose is to surprise someone, that's an ambush. The purpose of a stakeout is to gather evidence. If it's an ambush, like, oh, busted, we're going to jump out the van and get you, that's an ambush. It's a sting if you're trying to trick someone into revealing something. That's a sting operation. So there's stakeout, ambush, and sting operation. So it might start as a stakeout, and it might become an ambush, or it might become a sting. If you wanted to include this in your story, it's a good chance for some interesting dialogue, because you could cram a few characters in a small area for a long time, and then they'd have to talk about things, right? So sometimes dialogue in your stories might seem forced, but if your characters are on a stakeout, hey, this might be a chance for one character to ask another character about maybe their background. And it could add some dialogue to your story. And you can start to reveal some character. The next trope is police are useless. If your story is written from a young detective, like a child detective, this trope could be turned into adults are useless. So maybe it's the young kid and he goes to tell his parents, Mom, the neighbor, he has someone in his basement. Oh, Mr. Miller, he's such a nice guy. You're silly. You have such an imagination. It's like they'll do anything to not believe the person. I actually saw this in a movie last night. It was called Get Out. It was a pretty popular movie in America about an interracial couple, and the boy gets kidnapped by the girl and her family, and his friend goes to the police, and he tries to explain to the police, and the police officer's like, okay, 1 second, let me go get 2 other cops. And she brings the 2 other cops in the room, and he tells the story again, and then they all start laughing, and they go, ha ha ha, this is so funny, you're so silly, get out of here. Like, so he had the whole mystery solved, and he went to go tell the police about it, and the police said, yeah, right, you're making this up. So the police will do anything but help. Almost to a point where they themselves seem like maybe they're part of the crime. So here is a reference to a show you've probably never seen. But X-Files, it says, and that's if the report is from a respected professional. If they're an Agent Mulder, or worse yet, a teenager, the cops might try to pin the charges on them. So maybe you have the mystery solved and you go to the police and they actually say, maybe you did it. Evidence scavenger hunt. When you don't have any clues and you have to go searching for them. Again, it's self-explanatory. Chasing down clues. Or maybe chasing down witnesses. Maybe chasing down character witnesses. There was a TV show called Stranger Things on Netflix about a group of boys in the 1980s. And one of their friends went missing in the woods. And they had to get on their bicycles and ride around town to try to find evidence of what happened to their friend. So it's kind of like a journey. And our detective is like our hero. So it's like the hero's journey. It's the evidence scavenger hunt. You guys remember when we talked about mythology at the beginning of the year? Next, lights off, somebody dies. So you're at a party, it's a big party, and then all of a sudden, maybe there's a strike of lightning and the power goes out. And then it's out for like 10 seconds. When the power comes back on, there's a dead body in the middle of the room. And everyone goes, oh no! But then everyone in the room is a suspect. So maybe there's 30 people at the party. The lights go off. Lights come back on and there's somebody dead. Now you have 30 suspects. And you have to try to figure out who had the motive. And then maybe your story is about motive. So maybe there's not a whole lot of evidence. Maybe there's not much physical evidence. Maybe you have to figure out the mystery through motives. So this is just to establish the mystery. This one's easy enough. Next one, arrested for heroism. Maybe the person who was locked up the whole time finally escapes, and then the people who were trying to hold them captive chase them down, and a fight ensues, and the person who was held captive actually fights back and wins and beats up the captor, and the police show up, and the person on the ground beaten and bloody is the captor, and the person who's beating them up was the one who was captured, and the police arrest the guy who was on top beating him up, and because they mistake him for a criminal. Or maybe a hero intervenes and saves the day, but the cops show up late and don't see the beginning, and they end up arresting him and letting the bad guy go. Captain America behind bars. So that's exactly what this explains. A local supervillain is about to rob a bank. The superhero appears and asks her to stop. A fistfight ensues, and the cop arrives. And normally you would expect the cop to help, but as far as the cop is concerned, the superhero is actually the villain. And then maybe they do get arrested, and while they're behind bars, somebody else gets in trouble. And they weren't there to save them. Evidence dungeon. This can get kind of weird, but this is where, maybe there's one last house that we need to go check, just to cross off our list, and we knock on the door and nobody's answering, so maybe let me peek in the window, and I'm just going to walk in, and here's all the evidence. Just all laid out. Just out in the open. Just really clumsy. Here's the murder knife on the table. But maybe this room was down a flight of stairs, and when they went down the stairs, the door behind them closed. And they didn't know that the killer was in the house. And now they're in the basement, and they found all the evidence that shows you who did it. But now they're in the basement of this house of the killer. And they think they're there alone, and they found all the evidence. And maybe there's other cops who are at the station. They're like, "Where's that new rookie cop at?" And they're like, he went to that house. And right at that moment, they figure out that's the house of the killer. And they're like, "Oh no, we need to call him to get him out of there." But he's in the basement, and he doesn't have cell phone reception in the basement. And so they're like, "Oh no, we better go there and save him." And then the killer comes down the basement to get the guy, and then a fight ensues, and right as you think that rookie cop's about to die, the other cops show up and save the day. Right. So it's an evidence dungeon. Or the evidence dungeon sometimes is we found all the evidence. Now let me go get someone else to show them all the evidence. And when they come back, all the evidence is gone. So then you know for sure this person did it, but then all the evidence disappeared, and now you have no proof anymore. So this is a pretty common trope. You guys have you seen any of these things in TV shows or books before? Maybe you're starting to feel like nothing is actually original. Right? Maybe everything is a remix of a remix. Maybe everything is a copy of something else. So An evidence dungeon doesn't really make sense because what kind of criminal leaves all of his stuff laying around? But usually, maybe there's lots of photos on the wall. Alone with the Psycho. So maybe this is the evidence dungeon and Alone with the Psycho can be combined, because maybe you show up at the evidence dungeon and don't realize the Psycho is there. But simultaneously the two parties figure out the truth. So the house visitor is most often female and attractive, and she might go see somebody just to talk to them. What movie did I just see this in? Oh, the TV show Daredevil. Just saw this in the TV show Daredevil. There's a character called the Punisher, and she goes to find the Punisher's old colonel from the army to talk to him about maybe some good things about the Punisher. And then she's looking at photos on his wall, and she realizes, oh no, he's actually a bad guy. And here I am in his house alone with him. And he realizes that she just came to that conclusion by looking at that photo on the wall. And now he pulls out a gun and goes, you made a mistake coming here. And now she's alone with the Psycho. She didn't know he was the killer. She went to go find out something else. It turns out he was the killer. Vomiting cop, I talked about this one. Two cops show up to a crime scene, and the rookie cop pukes because it smells so bad or it's so disgusting, and the veteran cop is unfazed. This might also be accompanied by, if they go to the morgue and there's the person who's examining the bodies, and then that person is like eating pizza while they're like dissecting a body. That's something that a coroner would never do in real life, but they do that in like a book or a show to show you like, oh, this coroner, this is just like so casual for them to be like cutting up somebody's body and examining it that they're like eating like pizza while they're doing it, which is disgusting. But that's the point, is to like disgust you, but also show that this person is not bothered by this at all. It's like the same idea as the vomiting cop. Locked room mystery, we know because we read Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. We've seen this before, but this is the room was locked. There's a dead body inside. How is that possible? So in the Murder in the Rue Morgue, it's because an orangutan came through the window. So you know that one. Body in a bread box is finding a body in a weird spot. So it's not necessarily how did they get killed, but it's like, why did they get killed here? So this is from a show called Monk, and there was a dead person in the porta potty. Like, why would you kill a guy in a porta potty, right? So, and that maybe ties in with the story somehow. I don't know. I didn't see this episode. But. So, if you watch those TV shows with the detective TV shows, eventually they have to run through these things so many times. So, body in a bread box is like, maybe they have the same episode over and over, but they just find the body in a different weird spot each time. Like, oh, he was in the freezer. So it starts to become kind of redundant. I'll give you guys our next story tomorrow, and I'll also pass back your vocab quizzes. The next story is called The Adventure of the Speckled Band by Arthur Conan Doyle. It's a Sherlock Holmes story. I'll give you that tomorrow. This is the 20 rules for writing detective stories. This is just to help you with your rough drafts. Your rough drafts are due on Thursday. We didn't finish the tropes, so we will finish them tomorrow. Maybe you guys can, instead, since there's no homework, maybe you can work on your rough drafts. Also, there's plenty of time for you to procrastinate, but if you want to get started now, your videos are due on the 19th. So that date may have seemed far away, but it's getting closer. That's the bell. This is my homework. This is just for you guys to look over and help you with your story. Don't lose your trope worksheet because we are going to complete that and I will collect it.